From Cham Ithipiaso's 141,000-year sentence to Othman El Nayoui's 42,000 years, and Charles Scott Robinson's 30,000-year punishment. These are the longest prison terms ever handed down. Stay with me for the phantom fraudster, whose century-long sentence never even began. Ariel Castro is on this list because of a single line on his sentencing sheet that reads like a typo. In the American state of Ohio, in the year 2013, a court gave him life without parole, plus 1,000 years. The life term alone would have kept him inside forever. The 1,000 extra years were added on top of it. The reason for that stacking sits at the center of his crime. Castro had held 3 young women captive inside a house in Cleveland for about 10 years. Their names were Amanda Berry, Gina DeJesus, and Michelle Knight, and each had been taken off the street on a separate day, years apart. He kept them chained, moved between rooms, and controlled by fear. The house was fitted with locks and covered windows. For a decade, the outside world believed the women were missing or dead, while they lived a few miles from where they had grown up. The scale of the case is what pushed the sentence so high. Castro pleaded guilty to 937 felony count, a number that reflected years of repeated crimes, counted one act at a time. Each count carried its own possible penalty, and the court was free to run them one after another, rather than all at once. Among those counts was a charge of aggravated murder. It was tied to a pregnancy that Castro forced to end through violence. Ohio treated that act as a killing, and it was one of the reasons prosecutors could reach for the harshest options on the table. By pleading guilty, Castro avoided a death penalty trial. In exchange, he accepted a deal that guaranteed he would never walk free again, with the extra 1,000 years standing as a public marker of the total weight of the case. The women themselves shaped the final hearing. Michelle Knight, who had been held the longest, spoke directly in court and told Castro that she had survived and he had not broken her. It was one of the few times the public heard from a victim of a captivity case of this length in the person's own words. Amanda Berry had been the one who forced the ending. In the year 2013, she pushed at a door while Castro was away, called out to a neighbor, and reached a phone. Her call to emergency services led police to the house within minutes. All 3 women walked out alive, along with a child born during the captivity. That outcome is rare in cases like this, and it turned a private horror into a national story almost overnight. The legal design of the sentence matters for understanding the rest of this list. Courts in the United States often use consecutive stacking, which means placing each count in a line so the years add up instead of overlap. That single choice is how numbers climb into the thousands. For Castro, the life term made the math almost beside the point. He was never getting out, yet the court still added the 1,000 years, partly to record the true number of crimes and partly to answer the public demand for a total that matched the suffering. Hundreds of separate acts. The stacking rule lets the paper catch up to the reality. Castro did not spend long inside. About 1 month after his sentencing, in the year 2013, he was found dead in his cell, ruled a suicide by hanging. His 1,000-year sentence, and the life term beneath it, ended after roughly 30 days of service. That gap between the number on the page and the time actually served is the thread that ties this entire countdown together. It appears again and again, in different countries and for different crimes, and by the end it will explain the record at number 1. For now, hold on to that idea, because the next man carries not one life sentence, but well over 100, handed down for one of the deadliest attacks the United States has ever seen on its own soil. Terry Nichols earns his place because of a number that is almost hard to picture. In the American state of Oklahoma, in the year 2004, he received 161 consecutive life sentences without parole. That is 1 life term for each of the murder counts a state jury convicted him on. The crime behind that stack was the Oklahoma City bombing. On a morning in the year 1995, a truck loaded with explosives detonated outside a federal building in the city center. The blast killed 168 people, including 19 children in a daycare on a lower floor, and injured hundreds more. Nichols was convicted as an accomplice to the man who parked the truck. The plot had been built over months, and the court found that Nichols had helped gather and prepare the materials used in the attack. The way his sentences were counted reflects the human cost of the bombing. The state case assigned a separate murder charge for many of the lives lost, and the jury returned a conviction on 161 of them. The court then ordered each life term to run one after another. In practice, a single life without parole term already means a prisoner dies inside. Stacking 161 of them changes nothing about the years served. but it creates a formal record that names the dead through the sentence itself. Before the state case, Nichols had already faced federal court, where he was convicted and given a federal life term as well. The later state trial was pursued in part so that the full number of victims could be reflected in a second, heavier judgment. Where Nichols is held is part of the story. He was sent to the federal supermax facility, known as ADX Florence, in the American state of Colorado, a prison built to hold the most closely watched inmates in the country. It houses spies, bombers, and organized crime figures under strict isolation. Life there is measured in small, controlled routines. Inmates spend most of the day in single cells built from poured concrete, with limited contact and heavy monitoring. It is designed so that the men inside cannot organize, escape, or reach the outside. For a case built on mass casualties and domestic terrorism, that setting closed the loop. The court delivered a sentence meant to last beyond a natural life, and the prison system provided a place where that sentence could be carried out without exception. The Oklahoma City case also reshaped how the public thought about long sentences. It arrived during a period when American lawmakers were tightening rules on parole and building support for longer prison terms. A mass casualty attack gave those policies a face. Prosecutors wanted a result that could never be softened by a future parole board. Stacking life terms without parole was the surest way to guarantee it, and it set a template that other high-count cases would follow. That template is why so many entries on this list read as enormous numbers rather than single sentences. Once a court decides that each victim deserves a separate line, the total climbs on its own, and the message becomes as important as the math. The Nichols case remains one of the clearest examples of a sentence built to answer a specific horror. There was no attempt to hide the reasoning. The counts matched the victims, the terms ran consecutively, and the total stood as a public ledger of the dead. It also shows the difference between a life sentence and a term measured in years. Nichols will never be released, yet his number, 161 life terms, is smaller on paper than sentences you are about to see, that run into the thousands of years for far fewer victims. That contrast is the strange heart of this topic, and the next case makes it plain. Because one man in Oklahoma received a sentence so large that a single crime produced 30,000 years. Charles Scott Robinson holds one of the most quoted sentences in criminal history. In the American state of Oklahoma, in the year 1994, a court sentenced him to 30,000 years. The figure came from 6 separate counts, each carrying a term of 5,000 years, ordered to run consecutively. The crime that produced it was the rape of a 3-year-old girl. Robinson was convicted on multiple counts tied to that single victim, and the jury returned its verdict quickly, needing only about 35 minutes to decide. The reason he is on this list is that the court had no life without parole option available for these charges at the time. To keep him imprisoned, the judge stacked the counts into a number designed to outlast any human life. The judge was direct about the goal. The intent, as reported, was to keep Robinson locked away for the rest of his natural life, and the 30,000-year figure was the tool used to reach it. The number was symbolic, but the effect was meant to be permanent. That approach reveals a quiet feature of many record sentences. When a legal system lacks a clean way to say never, judges reach for arithmetic instead. 5,000 years multiplied by 6 says the same thing in a form the law will accept. The jury's speed added weight to the outcome. A deliberation of roughly half an hour signaled that the evidence left little doubt, and it gave the court a clear mandate to impose the maximum on every count. The Robinson case spread far beyond Oklahoma because of the pure size of the sentence. It became a fixture of viral lists and forum threads, where readers argued over whether a 30,000-year term was justice or theater. Supporters saw the number as fitting for a crime against a small child, a public statement that some acts place a person permanently outside society. Critics noted that no human serves 30,000 years, and that the figure told the public little about how long he would actually be held. Both reactions missed the practical point. The sentence was never about literal time. It was about removing any legal path to release in a system that, for these charges, could not simply say the word forever. The mechanics matter for the entries ahead. Oklahoma courts in this era became known for extreme consecutive sentencing, especially in sex crime cases, where multiple counts allowed judges to build terms far beyond a normal lifespan. Robinson's 6 counts were not padding. Each represented a distinct legal finding, and stacking them was standard procedure once the jury convicted. The court simply chose the maximum available for each and lined them up. This is why a single victim can produce a larger number than a mass casualty attack. The math follows the counts, not the body count, and Oklahoma proved willing to let that math run to its logical end. Robinson remains one of the defining names in this genre for a reason. His sentence turned an abstract legal tool, consecutive stacking, into a headline that people still repeat decades later. 30,000 years is easy to remember and hard to forget. Yet as large as it is, it sits low on this countdown, because the numbers ahead climb into ranges that make even 30,000 look modest. Some reach the tens of thousands, one reaches into 6 figures. But before those giants, the story leaves the courtroom and crosses an ocean, to a man in South Africa whose sentence was measured not only in years, but in the exact count of the people he was found to have killed. Moses Sithole belongs on this list for a sentence that reads almost like a tally sheet. In South Africa, in the year 1997, a court handed him 2,410 years in prison, with a minimum of 930 years set before any release could even be discussed. The number was built directly from the crimes proven against him. Those crimes were staggering in their count. Sithole was convicted of 38 murders, 40 rapes, and 6 robberies, a spree that unfolded across the Gauteng region. The press gave the case a grim label, the ABC murders, drawn from the areas where bodies were found. That name and the sheer volume of victims is why his sentence climbed into the thousands of years. The method behind the killings is what made the case so chilling to follow. Sithole lured many of his victims with the promise of work, presenting himself as a man who could offer a job to women searching for one. The offer was a trap, and it exploited a country with deep unemployment and desperate need. Once isolated, the women were attacked in open ground away from help. The pattern repeated with a cold consistency that investigators struggled to get ahead of, because each victim had followed what looked like an ordinary chance at employment. That single detail, the fake job, turned a series of separate crimes into a signature. It let the public understand how so many people could vanish into the same hands, and it deepened the horror when the full number became known. The trial itself carried a weight that matched the charges. Sithole faced a courtroom that had to account for dozens of victims by name, and the proceedings became a national reckoning with how such a spree had gone on for so long before it was stopped. Security around the case was heavy. The scale of public anger and the number of grieving families present made the trial one of the most closely watched in the country during that decade. When the verdict came, the court chose to reflect each crime rather than fold them into a single term. That decision produced the 2,410-year figure, a sentence structured so that the years spoke for the victims, one act at a time. The 930-year minimum is the part that gives the sentence its real teeth. In many systems, a long term still leaves a distant door open, but a minimum measured in centuries slams that door for any realistic future. Sithole is still serving that term today. It marks a difference from some cases on this list, where the huge number was later softened by caps or amnesties. Here, the structure was designed to hold, and no legal ceiling has cut it down to a modest figure. That durability is rare among record sentences. Many crumble into a handful of years once national rules apply. But Sithole stands close to what the court intended, a life measured out in a number no one could mistake for leniency. The case also shaped how South Africa spoke about serial predators for years afterward. It forced a conversation about how vulnerable job seekers were, and about how a killer could hide inside the ordinary rhythm of people looking for work. Sithole's name became shorthand for that danger, and his sentence became a reference point whenever the country debated whether its harshest terms went far enough. The 2,410 years answered that question in one direction, at least on paper. From a killer who counted his victims by the dozens, the list now swings to a very different kind of crime. One where the victims number in the thousands, but the weapon was not a knife. It was a mobile phone app that promised people a farm, Inmates. Mehmet Aydin is here for a fraud sentence so large it belongs beside the worst violent crimes on this list. In Turkey in the year 2025, he and his brother were each handed terms of roughly 45,376 years, with prosecutors having requested ranges that reached even higher. The crime was an online scheme known as Farm Bank, a scam that dressed itself up as a cheerful mobile game. Users bought virtual animals and land, believing their money was growing real returns, while the operation worked as a pyramid that paid old investors with the cash of new ones. The reason the number ran into the tens of thousands is the same reason it will keep appearing. Each defrauded investor could be counted as a separate victim, and thousands of victims produced thousands of years once the counts were added together. The Farm Bank story captured the public because of how ordinary its bait was. The app looked like a harmless farming game, the kind of thing families played on their phones, with animated fields and livestock that seemed to earn money as they grew. Behind that friendly screen, there was no farm and no profit engine. The money coming in from newcomers was simply passed to earlier members to keep the illusion of returns alive, which is the defining shape of a pyramid scheme. When the flow of new investors slowed, the structure collapsed, and enormous sums were revealed to be gone. The gap between the playful design and the ruin it caused is what made the case so widely discussed. Aydin's own flight added a dramatic chapter to the case. As the scheme unraveled, he left the country, becoming a fugitive, while investigators and furious investors demanded answers about where the money had gone. His absence turned the story into a manhunt narrative, followed closely by a public that had watched a familiar app become a symbol of loss. The pursuit and eventual legal reckoning played out under intense national attention. That attention shaped the sentence. A high-profile fraud that touched thousands of households invited a court response designed to match the scale of the betrayal, and the tens of thousands of years delivered exactly that. The Farm Bank case sits inside a fierce debate that runs through this whole topic. Many people argue that a fraud, draining the savings of thousands of families, deserves punishment as heavy as a violent crime, because ruined lives can follow financial loss just as they follow physical harm. Others push back, saying it is wrong to place a fraudster's sentence above that of a killer or a bomber. The disparity between fraud and violent crime is one of the most argued points whenever these lists appear online. Aydin's number forces that debate into the open. A 45,000-year term for a game about virtual cows outranks, in raw figures, several mass killers on this very countdown, which is exactly why the case draws such strong reactions. The practical future of the sentence is a separate matter from its size. As with other cases here, the on-paper figure and the years actually spent inside may diverge, shaped by national rules and appeals rather than by the headline number. But the symbolic force of the sentence is real. It told the public that a scheme built on a toy farm would be treated as a serious crime against thousands of people, not a clever business gone wrong. From a fraud measured in tens of thousands of years, the list now turns to a case, measured in lives lost in a single afternoon at a historic tourist site in Australia, where one man's attack changed a nation's laws forever. Martin Bryant. Martin Bryant is on this list for one of the strictest no-release orders Australia has ever imposed. In the year 1996, a court sentenced him to multiple life terms, with no possibility of parole, one of the heaviest combined judgments the country system allows. The crime was the Port Arthur massacre, at a historic former prison site turned tourist destination in Tasmania. Bryant opened fire on visitors and staff, killing 35 people and wounding 23 in a matter of minutes. He is here because Australia does not measure its record sentences in fantastical years, the way some countries do. Instead, it stacked life terms and closed the door on release entirely, which for a mass shooting produced a punishment meant to be absolute. The setting made the massacre especially haunting. Port Arthur was a place families visited to walk through preserved ruins and learn history, a quiet destination that carried no expectation of danger on an ordinary day. Bryant moved through that peaceful site, turning it into a scene of mass casualty. The contrast between the calm tourist grounds and the speed of the killing is part of why the event scarred the national memory so deeply. The victims spanned ages and backgrounds, ordinary people who had come to see a landmark. That randomness, the sense that anyone present could have been a target, gave the tragedy a weight beyond the raw number of dead. The The legal response reflected the impossibility of anything less than permanent removal. Rather than reach for a symbolic figure in the thousands, the court applied a life term for the killings and structured the sentence so parole would never be on the table. That choice matches a pattern seen at the top of this list, where a single life without release can be functionally heavier than a term of thousands of years that a legal cap will quietly shrink. Australia chose certainty over spectacle. Bryant remains incarcerated with no parole possibility, and the durability of that outcome stands in contrast to cases where enormous numbers dissolved into short actual terms. The most far-reaching consequence of Port Arthur happened outside the courtroom. In the wake of the massacre, Australia moved rapidly to reshape its firearm laws, introducing sweeping restrictions and a national program to reduce the number of guns in circulation. That reform became one of the most cited examples in the world of a country changing policy after a single mass shooting. The Bryant case is therefore remembered not only for its sentence, but for the legislation it triggered. Few crimes on this list left a mark on national law the way this one did. The sentence removed one man permanently, but the reforms aimed to prevent the next attack entirely, giving the case a legacy larger than its verdict. Bryant's place here highlights a divide in how justice systems handle the unthinkable. Some reach for the largest possible number to express outrage. Others, like Australia, reach for the plainest possible certainty, a life term with the exit sealed. Both roads end at the same destination, a prisoner who will die inside. But they tell very different stories to the public about what a sentence is supposed to mean. The countdown now shifts from an unforgettable massacre to a case that feels almost like a clerical error. An American man buried under thousands of years, not for murder, but for what a routine traffic stop turned up in his car. Larry D. Keel. Larry D. Keel provides one of the strangest entries on this list, because his enormous sentence came from a crime with no victim in the room. In the American state of Oklahoma, in the year 1992, he was sentenced to 2,501 years for drug offenses. The charges grew out of a small cocaine sale to an undercover officer, along with other drugs, marijuana, and paraphernalia found in his vehicle. He is on this list precisely because the numbers show how far consecutive stacking can push a case. That involved no killing at all. That contrast is the point. Keel sits between serial killers and mass bombers on a countdown about the longest sentences, holding a term of centuries for offenses many people would expect to draw years, not millennia. The Oklahoma sentencing culture of the era explains how it happened. During the tough-on-crime years of the late 1980s and early 1990s, American lawmakers expanded long sentencing tools and pressed hard on repeat and drug-related offenders. In that climate, a single arrest could carry multiple counts, each with a heavy maximum, and courts were willing to run them consecutively. Stack enough counts with high ceilings, and a drug case can reach into the thousands of years. Without a single act of violence, Keel's total was not the result of an unusual crime. It was the result of an unusual willingness to add every count to the end of the last, producing a figure that looks wildly out of scale with the offense. The case became a favorite example for critics of extreme sentencing. It is the kind of result people point to when they argue that huge numbers can detach from proportion, rewarding the mechanics of stacking rather than the seriousness of the harm. For readers scanning a list of the longest sentences, Keel breaks the expected pattern. There is no massacre, no captivity, no fraud ruining thousands. There is a car, some drugs, and a sentence that would suit the worst crimes imaginable. That break is exactly why it holds attention. It resets the viewer's sense of what produces these numbers, showing that the sentence length reflects the counting rules as much as the crime itself. The most telling part of Keel's story is how it ended. Despite the 2,500 one-year figure, he was paroled in the year 2009, released after serving only a portion of that immense total. The gap could not be starker. A sentence that reads like a life beyond, lives translated, in reality, into a term measured in years. The parole system quietly did what the number pretended could never happen. That outcome is a preview of the biggest twist in this topic. Again and again, a headline figure collides with the practical rules of parole. Caps and release, and the practical rules win. Keel's case works as a hinge in the countdown. It marks the moment where the promise of these giant numbers starts to wobble. where the viewer sees that a sentence of centuries can end in an ordinary parole hearing. It also sharpens a question that will hang over the rest of the list. If a 2,500 one-year term can shrink to a real release, what does a sentence of tens of thousands of years actually mean once the law gets involved? That question grows heavier as the list returns to violence on a mass scale. The next case leaves the American courtroom for Spain, and for a morning when commuter trains became the target of one of Europe's deadliest attacks. Jamal Zaugem appears on this list for a sentence that pushes into a range few crimes ever reach. In Spain, in the year 2007, he was sentenced to 42,922 years for his role in the Madrid train bombings, one of the highest raw figures ever handed down in a European court. The attack he was convicted over struck the commuter rail network of Madrid in the year 2004. Coordinated explosions tore through packed trains during the morning rush, killing 193 people and injuring hundreds more in a single, devastating strike. He is here because Spanish courts counted the victims individually, assigning years for the dead and the wounded until the total reached nearly 43,000. The number was a reflection of the body count carried by those trains. Zaugem's specific role placed him close to the mechanics of the attack. Witnesses connected him to the trains, and the case tied him to the mobile phones that were central to the bombing's design, devices used as the triggers for the explosives hidden aboard. Those phones turned ordinary technology into detonation tools. The plotters built devices that could be set off through a phone's timing and signal, which meant a common object became the key to a mass casualty event. The link between Zaugem and those phones is what anchored his conviction. It put him not at the edges of the plot, but near its working core, and the court's sentence reflected how central that role was judged to be. The morning of the attack remains one of the darkest in modern Spanish memory. The explosions hit during peak travel, when the trains were dense, with commuters heading to work and school, maximizing the human toll of each blast. Emergency crews arrived to scenes of mass injury across multiple stations, and the country plunged into shock and grief. The coordinated nature of the strike, several near simultaneous explosions, marked it as a planned and deliberate atrocity. That coordination shaped the trials that followed. Prosecutors treated the event as a single vast crime with many hands involved, and Zaugem emerged as one of the figures held most directly responsible for the carnage. The number attached to Zaugem carries a hidden asterisk that defines the Spanish cases. Under the law as it stood, the effective time a prisoner could serve was capped near 40 years. Regardless of the towering figure the court announced, that cap means the 42,922 years function as a moral statement rather than a literal schedule. The sentence names the full weight of 193 deaths, while the real term of imprisonment is limited to a span a human can actually serve. It is a striking contradiction. Spain hands down some of the largest numbers on Earth, then quietly holds the actual punishment to a few decades, producing sentences that are enormous in headline and modest in practice. Zaugem's case captures the double life of these mega sentences better than almost any other. On paper, he was condemned for tens of thousands of years. In reality, the law set his ceiling far lower, with release timelines pointing toward the middle of this century. That split is why the Madrid cases draw such fascination. They sit at the exact seam between symbolic justice and practical limits, showing how a country can express infinite condemnation while enforcing a finite term. Zaugem is not the only Madrid figure on this list, and the plot's full machinery, the explosives and the hidden logistics, waits later in the countdown under a co-defendant. Before that, the list crosses back to the United States, to a father whose sentence was built from 40 separate century-long terms. James Kevin Pope earns his place through a sentence assembled from an almost mathematical stack of penalties. In the United States, in the year 2008, he received a term equivalent to roughly 4,060 years, built from 40 sentences of 100 years each, plus additional time for further charges. The crimes were the sexual assault of 3 teenage girls over a period of about 2 years. Each offense became its own count, and each serious count carried a century-long penalty, which the court then ordered to run consecutively. He is on this list because his case shows the stacking principle in its purest form. 40 separate 100-year terms, laid end to end, is a design that produces a sentence no lifespan can absorb. The choice to run the terms consecutively rather than concurrently is the entire story of the number. Had the sentences overlapped, Pope would have faced a single 100-year term. Lined up one after another, they multiplied into thousands. That decision reflects how American courts treat repeated crimes against multiple victims. Each count is meant to stand for a distinct wrong, and refusing to let them overlap is a way of insisting that no offense is absorbed into another. For Pope, the result was a term of about 4,060 years, a figure that exists mainly to guarantee he never leaves prison, expressed in the language of stacked centuries rather than a plain life term. The case fits a broader pattern seen across this list, where crimes against young victims draw some of the longest American sentences. Courts have shown a particular willingness to stack counts to the maximum in these cases, treating each act as separately unforgivable. That willingness is why several entries here involve child victims rather than mass casualties. The counting rules, combined with the gravity courts assigned to these offenses, push the numbers upward, even when the victims number only a few. Pope's 40-century terms are a stark example. 3 victims produced a sentence larger than some attacks that killed dozens, a result driven by how the counts were structured rather than by a simple comparison of harm. The records around his case place him in the Texas prison system, serving a term designed to be functionally endless. There is no realistic path by which the arithmetic of his sentence allows a release within a human life. That permanence is the intended message. The court did not expect Pope to serve 4,060 years. It expected him to die in custody, with the enormous figure standing as the formal reason he would never be considered for freedom. In that sense, his sentence works exactly as designed, a number that reads as impossible but functions as a certainty, closing every door through sheer accumulation of counts. Pope's case reinforces the strange logic that runs through this entire topic. The size of a sentence often has less to do with the number of victims than with the number of counts, and the decision to stack them without overlap. Once a court commits to that path, the total climbs on its own, and a case with a handful of victims can outrank, in years, an attack that struck hundreds. The math simply follows the charges. From a sentence built of 40 stacked centuries, the countdown now moves to a case where the count is not centuries but life terms, 40 of them, imposed on a gunman who turned a New Year's celebration in Istanbul into a massacre. Abdulkadir Masharipov is on this list for a sentence that combines life terms and years into a single overwhelming judgment. In Turkey, in the year 2020, he was sentenced to 40 life sentences plus 1,368 years for a mass shooting that shocked the country. The attack took place at the Rione nightclub in Istanbul during New Year celebrations, moving into the year 2017. A gunman opened fire on the crowd, killing 39 people and injuring 79 as the new year began. He is here because the court answered a mass casualty terror attack by assigning a life term for each life taken, then adding more than 1,000 years on top for the wounded and the surrounding charges. The timing of the massacre made it especially horrifying. The victims had gathered to celebrate the turning of the year, a night of festivity by the water, when the shooting transformed the venue into a scene of mass death within moments. The attack was claimed in the name of an extremist group, and the gunman, a foreign national, had entered the country as part of a planned operation. That planning turned a random-looking horror into a deliberate act of terror. The crowd, drawn from many backgrounds and nations for the holiday, meant the victims came from several countries. The international toll widened the shock and drew global attention to the case as it moved toward trial. The days after the shooting became a tense manhunt. The gunman escaped the scene, and Turkish authorities launched an intensive search that gripped the nation while the attacker remained at large. He was eventually captured after roughly 2 weeks, a pursuit that played out under heavy media coverage. The manhunt and the fear that the attacker could strike again added a dramatic second act to an already devastating crime. His capture set the stage for a trial focused on both the attack and the wider network behind it. The court's task was to weigh not only the shooting, but the planning and support that had made it possible. The sentence structure followed the same logic seen elsewhere on this list. 40 life terms addressed the killings, while the additional 1,368 years accounted for the injured victims and the further counts tied to the attack. Stacking life sentences for a terror massacre is a way of ensuring the harshest possible outcome without relying on a single label. Each life term closes the door independently, and together they make any release unthinkable. The case also carried later complications, including claims raised in custody and ongoing legal proceedings, threads that kept the story in the news well after the verdict was delivered. Masharipov's sentence stands as one of the heaviest terror judgments on this countdown, built to answer 39 deaths with a punishment that could never be softened into freedom. The combination of life terms and years left no ambiguity. It also fits the pattern of nations, without a simple never option reaching for stacked life terms and added years to build permanence. The message was the same one seen from Oklahoma to Madrid, expressed in Turkey's own legal language. The countdown now turns from a gunman to a very different figure, a television preacher whose sentence blended fraud and abuse into thousands of years. In one of the most bizarre cases you will hear on this entire list, Adnan Oktar is arguably the strangest entry on this list, a televangelist and cult leader whose sentence reached 8,658 years. In Turkey, following a retrial in the year 2022, that figure was set for a mix of fraud and sexual abuse convictions. Oktar, also known by the pen name Harun Yahya, had built a public persona as a religious broadcaster, presenting himself on television as a figure of faith while running an organization that authorities came to treat as a cult. He is on this list because his crimes span two very different worlds: financial fraud and the abuse of followers, and the court combined them into a single towering term measured in the thousands of years. The public face of Oktar's operation was unusual enough to draw international curiosity on its own. His television programs featured a strange, glossy spectacle, surrounded by a group of devoted young women he referred to with the pet name kittens. That theatrical presentation masked a controlling structure beneath it. Investigators described an organization that dominated its members' lives, using loyalty and image to hold followers close, while Oktar cultivated a celebrity-like status. The gap between the shiny broadcasts and the alleged reality underneath is what made the case a global talking point. It looked from outside like entertainment, while the charges told a story of manipulation and harm. The legal path to 8,658 years ran through more than one trial. An earlier judgment had set a far lower figure, in the range of about 1,075 years, before a retrial pushed the total dramatically upward. That jump is a notable feature of the case. Rather than a sentence shrinking on appeal, as often happens, Oktar's ballooned, reflecting how the retrial weighed the combined counts of fraud and abuse more heavily than the first. The result was described in some reports as among the nation's longest for that blend of crimes, a sentence that placed a television preacher alongside mass killers and fraud kingpins in the ranking of extreme terms. The blend of charges is what makes Oktar's number so contested. Fraud and abuse are very different harms, and folding them into one enormous figure raises the same debate that surrounds every financial case on this list. For some, the sentence fits a man who exploited both money and people through a manufactured religious authority. For others, the pure size of the number becomes theater, a figure too large to correspond to any real term of imprisonment. Either way, the case stands out for its sheer oddity. Few entries here involve a defendant who was, until his fall, a fixture of national television with a carefully built brand of faith. Oktar remains incarcerated under that retrial sentence, his broadcasting empire dismantled and his public image inverted from celebrity preacher to convicted cult leader. The 8,658 years cemented that reversal in the harshest possible terms. His case is a reminder that record sentences do not belong only to bombers and serial killers. They can also crown the collapse of a manufactured guru, whose crimes were hidden behind a screen of glamour and religion. From a cult leader's bizarre downfall, the list returns to a single night of catastrophe in New York, where a personal argument turned a crowded social club into one of the deadliest fires in American history. Julio Gonzalez. Julio Gonzalez is on this list for a sentence born from one of the deadliest fires the United States has ever seen. In the American state of New York, in the year 1991, he was sentenced to 4,350 years built from 174 separate counts. The disaster was the Happy Land Social Club fire. In the year 1990, Gonzalez set ablaze at a crowded club in the Bronx, and the fire killed 87 people, most of them young immigrants who had gathered there for the night. He is here because the court assigned counts for the dead, most carrying terms of 25 years, and stacked them into a figure that reflected the scale of the loss inside that single building. The trigger for the fire was chillingly personal. Gonzalez had argued with an ex-girlfriend who worked at the club, and after being ejected from the venue, he returned with a container of gasoline and set the entrance alight. That small, private dispute became a mass casualty event because of where it happened. The club was packed, the exits were limited, and the fire spread fast, trapping dozens of people inside with almost no way out. The contrast between the trivial cause, a soured relationship, and the horrifying result, 87 dead, is what made the Happy Land fire so haunting. A moment of rage produced one of the worst nights in the city's history. The victims gave the tragedy its lasting weight. Most were young people from the Dominican community, out for an ordinary evening of music and company, whose lives ended in minutes when the fire cut off their escape. The loss devastated an entire immigrant neighborhood at once, with dozens of families grieving together. The event became a symbol of how fragile safety could be in an overcrowded venue with too few exits. That collective grief shaped the sentencing. The court's 174 counts were a way of naming the scope of the disaster, ensuring that the number attached to Gonzalez matched, as closely as arithmetic could, the human toll of the fire. The structure of the sentence followed the multi-count logic seen across this list, with most counts set at 25 years and ordered consecutively. The 4,350-year total emerged as a direct product of the death count times the per-count penalty. Gonzalez was denied parole and remained imprisoned for the rest of his life. In the year 2016, he died in prison of a heart attack, his sentence ending not through release, but through death in custody. That ending places him among the cases where the enormous number held firm to the end. There was no cap, no amnesty, no parole. The 4,350 years functioned exactly as intended, holding him until his death. The Happy Land case remains a landmark in discussions of both fire safety and extreme sentencing. It pushed changes in how such venues were regulated, and it left a permanent scar on the community that lost so many in one night. For this countdown, Gonzalez stands as a case where a small human conflict produced a catastrophe, and where the legal system answered with a number meant to speak for every life lost inside that club. From a fire sparked by a single argument, the list now turns to one of the most astonishing legal outcomes here. A man whose appeal did not shorten his sentence, but added nearly 10,000 years to it. Darren Benelford Anderson. Darren Benelford Anderson holds one of the most unusual distinctions on this entire list. In the American state of Oklahoma, in the year 1994, he ended up with a sentence of roughly 11,750 years. But the path to that number is what makes his case unforgettable. His crimes included the rape of an elderly woman, along with robbery, kidnapping, and larceny, a combination of serious counts that produced a heavy original sentence in the range of about 2,250 years. He is on this list not just for the final figure, but for how it grew. When Anderson appealed his conviction, the outcome reversed the usual logic of the courts in a way that few defendants have ever experienced. The appeal is the heart of the story. Rather than winning a reduction, Anderson was reconvicted and saw his sentence increase by about 9,500 years, transforming a term of roughly 2,250 years into one that pushed past 11,000. That result stands as one of the largest post-appeal increases ever recorded. A man who challenged his punishment walked away buried under nearly 5 times the original number, a near-perfect illustration of a legal gamble gone catastrophically wrong. A later adjustment trimmed the figure by around 500 years, but the core outcome remained. Anderson had fought his sentence, and in doing so, added thousands of years to it, an almost surreal turn for anyone expecting appeals to bring relief. The mechanics behind the increase lie in how the retrial handled his counts. On reconviction, the stacking of penalties produced a far larger total than the first proceeding, showing how sensitive these enormous numbers are to the details of each trial. It is a reminder that in a system built on consecutive counts, the final figure is not fixed by the crime alone. It shifts with how each count is weighed and ordered, which is why a second trial could balloon the total so dramatically. For Anderson, that sensitivity worked entirely against him. The same principle that lets courts express permanence through arithmetic also let a retrial multiply his punishment far beyond what he first received. The case became a cautionary tale in legal circles precisely because it inverted a basic expectation. Defendants appeal to seek mercy, and the assumption is that the worst case is simply losing the appeal, not multiplying the sentence. Anderson's outcome shattered that assumption. It demonstrated that in certain systems, a retrial can revisit every count and reassemble them into a heavier whole, leaving an appellant far worse off than before. That risk is rarely so vividly illustrated. His near 11,750-year sentence is remembered less for its size than for the shocking way it was reached, a punishment that grew because he dared to challenge it. Anderson's place on this list captures a side of extreme sentencing that pure body count cannot explain. His number is a product of process, of appeals and retrials and stacking, as much as of the crimes themselves. It deepens the central lesson of this countdown, that these figures are shaped by legal machinery in ways that can defy intuition, producing outcomes that feel less like justice measured and more like arithmetic unleashed. From a sentence that grew through an appeal, the list swings back to raw violence, to a Texas courtroom and a triple killing carried out at point-blank range outside a nightclub. Rigoberto Vázquez Hernandez is on this list for a sentence that answered a triple murder with a term stretching into the thousands. In the United States, in the year 2013, he was sentenced to 7,000 years for killing 3 people in a single violent burst. The crime was a point-blank shooting outside a Dallas nightclub where he gunned down 3 victims at close range. 3 lives ended in seconds, and the court responded with a figure meant to make any release impossible. He is here because the sentence shows how American courts translate a small number of killings into a towering term, assigning years for each victim and stacking them until the total climbs far beyond a normal lifespan. The setting was an ordinary night out that turned lethal. A nightclub, a crowd, and a confrontation escalated into gunfire, and the close-range nature of the shooting left no ambiguity about the intent behind it. 3 separate victims meant 3 separate murder counts, and each count carried a heavy penalty. Ordered consecutively, they built toward the 7,000-year figure, a number designed to speak for all 3 lives at once. The immediacy of the crime, 3 people shot at close range in a public place, gave the case a brutal clarity. There was no elaborate plot, only sudden, decisive violence that the court answered with a decisive sentence. The 7,000-year term fits a familiar shape on this list, where a handful of victims can still produce a sentence in the thousands through the logic of stacked counts. It is the same arithmetic scene in the multi-victim cases before it. What distinguishes Vázquez Hernandez is the compression of the crime into a single moment. Unlike a captivity case spanning years or a fraud touching thousands, his offense was a brief eruption, yet the sentence reached comparable heights. That comparison underscores how the counting rules, rather than the duration of the crime, drive these figures. 3 deaths in seconds and dozens of deaths over minutes can both land a defendant in the thousands of years. The purpose of such a term is straightforward. A 7,000-year sentence is not a schedule but a seal, ensuring that Vázquez Hernandez cannot be considered for release within any human timeframe. It reflects the same instinct seen throughout this countdown, the drive to make permanence explicit when a simple life label may feel insufficient to the court or the victims' families. The number does the work of finality. For a triple murder committed in the open, the sentence stands as the legal system's way of removing the offender for good, expressed in a figure that leaves no room for a future parole calculation. Vázquez Hernandez may be one of the lesser-known names on this list, but his case is a clean example of the core mechanic that defines it. Multiply victims by heavy per-count penalties, stack the results, and the sentence explodes. His 7,000 years sit as a stark data point in the pattern, proof that even a single violent incident can produce a term that dwarfs the sentences of many longer-running crimes. From a sudden triple killing, the list now returns to the world of financial fraud, to a tie scheme that defrauded tens of thousands of people, and a sentence that was cut in half for a single reason. René Lopez is on this list for one of the longest sentences in his local court's history, handed down for a prolonged crime against a member of his own family. In the United States, around the year 2017, he was sentenced to 1,503 years. The crime was the repeated sexual assault of his daughter over a span of roughly 4 years. Each offense across that period contributed to a mounting series of counts, which the court stacked into a term of more than 15 centuries. He is here because his case represents the intersection of two patterns seen throughout this list: crimes against children and the willingness of American courts to reach extreme totals, when the offenses are both grave and repeated. The betrayal at the center of the case gave it a particular darkness. The victim was his own child, and the abuse continued over years within the family home, a setting that should have been a place of safety. That breach of the most basic trust is what drove the court toward the harshest available response. Prolonged abuse within a family carries an aggravating weight that judges and juries have consistently answered with the longest possible terms. The 4-year span meant the crimes could be counted as many separate acts rather than one. And it was that multiplicity, act after act over years, that allowed the sentence to climb into the thousands. Lopez's conduct in court sharpened the outcome. Reports noted that he showed no remorse and blamed the victim, a posture that removed any grounds for leniency and hardened the court against him. A defendant's refusal to accept responsibility, and worse, an attempt to shift blame onto the child he had harmed, tends to push a sentence toward its maximum. There was no mitigation to weigh, only aggravation. That absence of remorse is a recurring feature in the harshest cases here. Courts reserve their most extreme terms for offenders who show neither regret nor any sign that a shorter sentence could serve a purpose. The 1,503-year figure, described as among the longest in its local history, functions as a permanent removal. Lopez will not outlive a fraction of it, and that is precisely the intent behind such a number. It places him among the many entries on this list whose enormous sentences exist to guarantee lifelong incarceration for crimes against children, expressed through stacked counts rather than a single life term. The case drew strong public reaction, fitting a pattern where communities overwhelmingly support maximum punishment. In child abuse cases, viewing the extreme figure as a fitting answer to a profound betrayal. Lopez's entry captures the emotional core that fuels so much of this topic. Crimes against children generate a near-universal demand for the harshest response, and the stacking system gives courts a way to deliver a number that matches that demand. His 15 centuries are not a literal expectation, but a statement, a refusal to allow any path back to freedom for a father who turned his home into a place of harm. From a family betrayal answered with more than 1,000 years, the countdown returns to the scale of mass fraud, to a tie scheme that swept up tens of thousands of victims, and a defendant whose confession changed his sentence dramatically. Pudet Kidith is on this list for a fraud sentence that reached deep into the thousands of years before a single decision cut it in half. In Thailand, in the year 2017, he was originally sentenced to 13,275 years. The crime was a Ponzi scheme built from 2,653 counts of fraud, a scam that defrauded roughly 40,000 people out of more than $160 million. Each victim's loss contributed to a count, and the counts built the towering total. He is here because his case is one of the clearest demonstrations of how fraud, when counted victim by victim, can produce sentences that rival or exceed those of violent mass casualties, driven purely by the number of people harmed. The scheme worked like many pyramid frauds, promising strong returns, while paying earlier investors with the money of newer ones. As long as fresh victims kept joining, the illusion of profit held, and the operation grew. With tens of thousands of participants, the scale was enormous. 40,000 people is not an abstract figure. It is a crowd the size of a city district, each drawn in by the promise of easy gains. When the scheme collapsed, the loss of more than $160 million fell on those thousands of investors, many of whom had trusted the operation with significant portions of their savings. The human cost of the fraud was vast, even without a single act of violence. The number of counts is what turned the case into a record contender. with 2,653 separate fraud counts. The court had thousands of individual penalties to work with, and stacking them consecutively produced the original 13,275-year figure. That structure mirrors the fraud cases seen elsewhere on this list, where the per victim or per transaction counting method allows a financial crime to reach numbers usually associated with the deadliest offenses. It is this counting method that fuels the fierce debate over whether fraud belongs beside murder on lists like this. The raw arithmetic can place a Ponzi scheme above a massacre, even when no one was physically harmed. The most striking turn in the case was the halving of the sentence. Because Puget confessed, the court reduced his term to roughly 6,637 years, cutting the original figure in half as a reward for the plea. That reduction, measured in thousands of years, highlights the surreal nature of these numbers. A discount for confessing is normally counted in months or years, but here it amounted to more than 6,000 years shaved off the top. Even the reduced figure remains far beyond any human lifespan. And Thai rules on effective time served are likely to limit the practical term, well below the headline number, as they have in other national fraud cases. Puget's case sits at the crossroads of scale and symbolism. The enormous count of victims justified an enormous number, while national rules and the confession discount reshaped it in ways that show how fluid these totals really are. It stands as a prime example of the fraud versus violence debate that runs through this list. A scheme that ruined 40,000 people, producing a sentence larger than that of many killers, and dividing opinions sharply. From a mass fraud measured in thousands of counts, the list now returns to the Madrid bombings, to the co-defendant whose sentence exposed the hidden machinery of the plot, and the legal cap that quietly shrinks these European giants. Othman el-Nayyoui carries the single largest raw sentence tied to the Madrid case, and one of the highest on this entire list. In Spain, in the year 2007, he was sentenced to 42,924 years, a figure built count by count from his role in the plot. His conviction centered on the logistics behind the 2004 train bombings, the behind-the-scenes work that made the coordinated attack possible. He is on this list for a sentence that reflects the full weight of that mass casualty event assigned to a key participant, where the earlier Madrid figure focused on the man linked to the trains themselves. El-Nayyoui's role reaches into the preparation, the materials, and the network that assembled the bombs before they ever reached the rails. The machinery of the plot is what his case reveals. The explosives used in the attack were sourced from mining operations, drawn from stocks that were never meant to leave industrial hands, and funneled instead into a terror plot. That sourcing turned ordinary industrial material into the core of a mass killing. The path from a mine to a commuter train is the hidden supply chain that El-Nayyoui's conviction helped expose, showing how the attack was built long before the morning it struck. The preparation reportedly centered on a rural property, a farmhouse setting where the plot's pieces could be assembled away from the city's watch. That quiet location, far from the crowded platforms, was where the deadly logistics came together. The sentence itself, at 42,924 years, edges even higher than the co-defendant's figure, making it the peak number from the Madrid case. It was assembled the same way, with the court assigning years across the many counts, tied to the 193 deaths and the hundreds injured. That method is why the Spanish bombing sentences reach into the tens of thousands. Each victim contributes to the total, and with a death toll of 193, the arithmetic climbs into ranges that few crimes anywhere can match. El-Nayyoui's number therefore stands as a monument to the scale of the attack, a figure so large it can only be understood as the sum of an entire commuter network's worth of casualties. Yet the same crucial limit that governs the other Madrid case applies here. Spanish law of the era capped effective time near 40 years, meaning the 42,924-year figure translates into a real term a fraction of its size, with release timelines pointing toward the middle of this century. That cap is what separates the Spanish giants from cases where the number holds firm. The court could announce tens of thousands of years, but the law ensured that the actual imprisonment would be measured in decades, not eternities. This gap has made the Madrid sentences a frequent subject of debate, cited as proof that some of the largest numbers on Earth are, in practice, symbolic declarations rather than literal schedules of punishment. El Nayui's entry closes the Madrid chapter of this list by exposing both its horror and its illusion. The horror is the 193 lives and the industrial explosives turned into weapons. The illusion is the number, vast on paper and capped in reality. Together with the earlier Madrid figure, his case shows how a single atrocity can generate two of the highest sentences here, each one a reflection of the same devastating morning, viewed from a different role in the plot. From a European attack, whose colossal numbers dissolve under a legal cap, the list turns back to the United States, to a serial predator whose sentence carried a release date almost a century away, and an ending that came far sooner. Billy Joe Godfrey is on this list for a sentence that stacked life terms and years for the prolonged abuse of children. In the United States, in the year 2015, he received a term reported as 1,050 years, equivalent to 35 life sentences. The crimes involved the sustained abuse of 2 children, offenses that span the late 1990s, from the year 1995 to the year 1999. The long duration and the number of counts produced the towering total. He is here because his case combines the two elements that generate the harshest American sentences: crimes against children and offenses repeated over a span of years, each act adding to a total the court built into decades of life terms. The extended timeframe of the abuse is central to the sentence. Crimes committed over roughly 4 years become many separate counts rather than a single incident, and each count carries the potential for a heavy, independent penalty. That multiplicity is how the court reached the equivalent of 35 life sentences. Each life term represents a distinct finding, and stacking them expresses the view that no single act should be absorbed into another when children are the victims. The 1,050-year framing places the same outcome in the language of years, offering a number that reads as astronomical while functioning identically to the stacked life terms, a guarantee that Godfrey would never be released. The most striking moment of the case came at sentencing. Godfrey reportedly asked the court for the chance to die outside prison walls, a plea for some eventual freedom before the end of his life. The request was denied. That refusal captured the court's stance in a single decision. There would be no distant mercy, no arrangement for a release in old age. The sentence was designed to hold him until his death, inside, without exception. The denial also spoke to the nature of the crimes. For prolonged abuse of children, the court showed no willingness to soften the outcome, treating the plea as incompatible with the gravity of what had been done. Godfrey's sentence fits a pattern that appears repeatedly on this list, where child victims draw some of the longest terms despite the small number of individuals harmed. The counting rules and the moral weight assigned to these crimes push the figures upward. It sits alongside cases like the earlier child abuse entries, forming a cluster of American sentences built to guarantee lifelong incarceration for offenders whose crimes courts regard as among the least forgivable. The public response to such cases is consistent, with strong support for maximum punishment and little sympathy for pleas of eventual freedom. Godfrey's denied request became a symbol of that hard line. The equivalence of 1,050 years and 35 life sentences underlines the theme of this entire topic. Whether expressed as stacked life terms or as a number in the thousands, the goal is the same: permanent removal from society. Godfrey's case shows both forms working together, a term that names the years and the life sentences at once, leaving no legal path back to freedom and no ambiguity about the court's intent. From a sentence built to hold a predator until death, the list moves to a serial rapist whose term carried a release date near the end of this century, a distant horizon he would never reach. Ronnie Shelton is on this list for a sentence that answered a years-long reign of terror with a term of thousands of years. In the American state of Ohio, following convictions spanning the late 1980s into the 1990s, he received 3,195 years. Known as the West Side Rapist, Shelton was convicted in connection with more than 49 rapes and over 230 charges, a spree that terrorized the Cleveland area for over 5 years. The sheer volume of counts drove the sentence into the thousands. He is here because his case is one of the starkest examples of a serial predator's crimes being counted individually and stacked, producing a number that reflected the scale of fear he had spread across an entire community. The duration and reach of the crimes define the case. For more than 5 years, Shelton attacked victims across the Cleveland area, and the pattern of assaults created a climate of fear that gripped neighborhoods and dominated local headlines. The label West Side Rapist reflected both the geography of the attacks and the way the case came to symbolize a community under siege. Each new assault deepened the dread, and the search for the attacker became a regional priority. When he was finally caught and convicted, the case carried the weight of dozens of victims and years of accumulated terror. The court faced the task of translating that long campaign of harm into a single, definitive sentence. The 230-plus charges are what pushed the total so high. With more than 49 rapes and hundreds of associated counts, the court had an enormous stack of penalties to impose, and running them consecutively produced the 3,195-year figure. That structure is the same one seen throughout this list, where a serial offender's individual acts are each counted and added. The result is a sentence built to represent every victim, refusing to fold the crimes into a lesser whole. The number was designed to ensure Shelton would never return to the community he had terrorized. Its size, measured in thousands of years, placed any realistic release far beyond his natural life. The original parole projection made the permanence concrete in an almost eerie way. Reports pointed to a possible release date near the year 2094, a horizon so distant it functioned as a life sentence in all but name. That date, more than a century from the crimes, is a vivid illustration of how these sentences work. The number is not meant to be served in full, but to push any release so far into the future that it becomes meaningless. For Shelton, even that distant horizon never arrived. In the year 2018, he died in prison by suicide, ending his sentence decades before the projected date and closing the case on the West Side Rapist for good. Shelton's entry brings together the recurring threads of this list: a serial predator, a mountain of counts, a sentence in the thousands, and a release date so far off it was purely symbolic. His case embodies the American approach to permanent incapacitation. It also ends like several others here, not in release but in death behind bars. The true conclusion of so many of these towering sentences, regardless of the number on the page. Now only one case remains, and it is the reason this entire topic exists. It is the largest prison sentence ever recorded, a figure so vast it broke a world record, handed to a woman whose crime was not murder and whose actual time served will astonish you. Chammy Thipiaso holds the record that defines this entire genre. In Thailand, in the year 1989, she was sentenced to 141,078 years, the longest prison sentence ever officially recorded, a number that dwarfs every other case on this list. Her crime was not violence but fraud. She operated a massive pyramid scheme that defrauded more than 16,000 people of around $204 million, running one of the largest financial scams in Thailand's history at the time. She is at number 1 because her sentence is the ultimate expression of the counting method seen throughout this countdown. 16,000 victims, counted individually, produced a figure so enormous it entered the record books and never left. The scheme itself was vast and deeply woven into Thai society. Cham attracted thousands of investors with the promise of high returns, and her operation grew large enough to touch a wide swath of the public before it collapsed. Like every pyramid scheme, it depended on a constant flow of new money to pay earlier investors. For a time, the returns looked real, and the scale of participation swelled into the tens of thousands. When the structure failed, the losses were staggering. Around $204 million spread across more than 16,000 victims. The collapse of such a large scheme made the case a national scandal and set the stage for a record-breaking response. The path to 141,078 years ran through the arithmetic of victims. With thousands of counts of fraud, each carrying its own penalty, the court stacked them into a total that no human mind can truly picture, let alone a human life. That method is the same one seen in the Thai and Turkish fraud cases earlier on this list, but taken to its absolute extreme. Chamway's victim count was so high that the resulting figure surpassed every other sentence ever handed down. The number became world famous precisely because of its impossibility. A sentence of 141,078 years is beyond comprehension, and it turned Chamway's name into the answer to the question of the longest prison term in history. But here is the revelation promised at the very start of this list. The reason her record is so misunderstood. Cham did not serve 141,078 years, or anything close to it. She served only about 8 years before her release. Thai law placed strict caps on the time that could actually be served for fraud, and amnesties further reduced the practical term. The record-breaking figure was symbolic from the moment it was announced, a number for the history books rather than a real schedule. By around the year 2009, Cham had been released, walking free after a fraction of the sentence that had made her infamous. The largest prison term ever recorded translated, in reality, into fewer years than many ordinary sentences. That gap is the truth this entire countdown has been building toward. The largest number in the history of criminal sentencing produced only about 8 years of actual imprisonment, exposing the vast distance between what these figures say and what they mean. Cham's case is the perfect final entry because it holds both extremes at once. The record-breaking figure and the modest reality. The world's longest sentence, and one of its clearest illustrations that such numbers are often symbolic. Across this list, that same pattern appeared again and again, from Spanish caps to American parole to Thai amnesties, and it finds its ultimate form here. The longest sentence ever recorded, 141,078 years, was served in about 8, and no case captures